He said that the people under threat are the measurers, the people in the middle. It's not the creators and not the sellers. So, what do you think about AI's role in maybe collapsing the information problem and actually allowing you to do more of this discovery driven growth, which requires, if you read the book, great book, by the way, classic, experimentation,
Mhm.
hypothesis driven innovation and strategy?
Yeah. So I think it's the future. I think that's where the future will be, because if you follow the principles in discovery-driven growth, and I'll just take a minute to explain where that all came from. So discovery-driven planning, which was the article that came out in 1995, and then the book came out some years later, had its roots in this puzzle to me that I was studying when I was doing my doctorate degree. And this was that all these big companies, Bosch would be an example, Walt Disney
Yeah.
would be an example, all these big companies would get into areas that were sometimes only moderately new to themselves and just have these colossal failures.
Yeah.
So I started to collect these case studies in a file I call my flops file. You have to lose your parent company at least $50 million to get into my flops file. That's the bar.
Yeah.
And what I found when I looked at them across the pattern was this very common pattern of failure. So untested assumptions taken as facts,
Yes.
very few opportunities for low commitment, low cost testing. Leaders often given a very aggressive deadline and this thing has to launch in 18 months or else. I'm sure you've been party to those conversations. Um, so kind of committed to a course of action without ever exploring whether that was the correct one or not. A lot of times big budgets and big teams up
Big
front
bets.
on the theory that that's going to accelerate progress, right? We're going to get our 18 months much faster. And so my colleague and I began to think about, well, how would you design a system when you didn't have the kind of certainty you have in your core business?
Yeah.
And what your job is instead is learning. And we kind of said each of those principles is wrong. So what we want is start with what the end is in mind. So what does success look like? And then, okay, what does that imply for how many units we need to sell? How many transactions we need to have? How big does this thing need to be? And so you work backward and then you say, okay, does this thing pass the market test? Is it even realistic? And a lot of ideas just die at that point if you're doing this right.
Yeah.
Then you have the operational specifications. So, okay, if I've got to sell 50 every day, how many sales calls does that imply my salespeople need to make? And. And since you don't know what you're doing at this early stage, you're going to be making assumptions. And what we encourage you to do in this technique is write them down. And then the last piece of it is you plan, but you don't plan this 18-month glorious launch. You plan for a few checkpoints. And a checkpoint is a moment at which you're going to convert assumptions into facts. You're going to learn something. So when I think about technology, and I'm actually doing, I'd love to show this to you. I'm doing some work with a Finnish company called Kato Software that has this really interesting way of connecting budgets and strategy and
Yeah.
resources, people, and they're now embedding some of these ideas in a module in that software. And what I think it can do is, so Mike learns something about a customer that takes the form of testing an assumption. You put in
Yeah.
what you learned and what you did, and now anybody in the company can see that. And if you design the AI appropriately, the next time, George is starting a project, and it's sort of with a similar set of customers, the AI could say to you, George, let's just reflect a little on what Mike learned in that last project. So let's make our own mistakes. Let's not repeat the mistakes over and over again. So I think AI has tremendous potential to make that all transparent. And right now it's not. It's the state of the art, shockingly to me, is still spreadsheets and PowerPoints.
Hey, you've just watched a clip from Show Your Priors podcast. Check out our main channel for full episodes. We have a new one every Tuesday. If you liked what you saw, give us a like and subscribe. It's free for you and helps us out a ton. Did we miss something during our discussions? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.